Hey guys, Pastor Mark here again to address some things from the week that are going on beyond the pews. And so, actually been kind of a slow news week. There hasn't been anything that just really jumps out at me and demands to be talked about, which is strange because usually there's so many stories I'm having to figure out what to pick. However, there are two things that I heard about, saw, read, in the news that I think speak to some bigger issues that are going on that we need to think about. The first one is the recent release of the Sex Abuse Task Force's report from the Southern Baptist Convention. I will be addressing this more deeply, in great more detail, this coming Wednesday. However, there's two issues as I'm reading through this thing that keep popping up, that keep being an issue of complaint, that I keep seeing in other news articles and stories about the report that are criticisms. And I think that in our compassion for victims of abuse, that we can sometimes get a little ahead of ourselves in looking at the situation. And so we always want to be sure that, yes, we care for others and that we try to do what we can appropriately do to help and care for those who are in need, those who are hurting. But we also have to understand there are certain limitations, there are restrictions, there are guidelines, there are principles, there are things that are in place in the world, in society, and in the Southern Baptist Convention that sometimes don't allow us to do what we may want to do or what others may want us to do. So two things that I repeatedly see pointed at, as I said, often in a critical manner, is one, that SBC leadership was often more interested in avoiding liability than in helping survivors of abuse. And two, that they're using Southern Baptist polity, right, the organization of the SBC, as an excuse. And so I want to take a look at those two things because I don't think they're excuses. I mean, they could be. But I also think there's something we need to understand about the situation, about the Southern Baptists, and about how we think about this going forward. So at one point in the report, it says that executive committee, leadership, and council, and that's an important one because these people are lawyers, was singularly focused on avoiding liability. Well, here's the thing. These are lawyers. That's what lawyers do. That's their job. That's why you pay them. That's why you employ them, because if you're not liable for something, you don't want to assume the liability for that thing. It would actually be wrong for the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention to assume liability it does not rightly possess, because that liability is going to be paid out in the form of money. And the money from the money for the convention, Southern Baptist, comes out of the offering plates of local churches. And so they have a responsibility that money is being given specifically for the use of furthering the gospel, furthering the kingdom, missions, education, that sort of thing, and to unrightfully, is that even a word, assume some obligation that they don't really have would be wrong of them to do, and it'd be wrong of us to expect them to do. Yes, our hearts break for what people have gone through. Yes, we want to find ways to help them. Yes, we absolutely need to shore up where our blind spots and our failures may be, but we also don't want to incur obligations that we do not possess, and therefore use up resources that people have given for specific things. I mean, if you give me money for something specific, let's say you say, hey, I want to help your kids go to college, and so you give me money that's going to pay for my kids to go to college. Thank you so much. That's so wonderful. And I decide to pay off my car and go buy a boat. And well, hold on a second. Time out. That's not what that was for. Yes, paying off my car may be a good thing. Yes, there may be a good reason to have a boat, but that's not what that money was for. And so in the same way, yes, our hearts break for what abuse victims have gone through. Yes, we absolutely want to be able to help. However, in trying to hold the Southern Baptist Convention liable for something it is not responsible for would end up in the misuse of funds that were entrusted to them for other things. And so whenever people, well, they're just trying to avoid liability. Yes, they're trying to avoid liability they don't rightfully own. If there is liability there, yes, it's there. But you don't want to unnecessarily take on liability and obligation. So, and I know that can come across as heartless. Well, shouldn't you care more about these victims and what they've gone through than you do about, well, we should care about both. And you find a way to solve an issue within the constraints of the reality of boots on the ground, or reality of a system you're in. Which brings me to the second point, because often what is accused, the criticism, and I've seen all over social media and different media news reports, is that advocates of victims and victims were often met with the refrain that the Southern Baptist Convention could take no action due to its polity, the structure of the SBC being that the church autonomy, that the Southern Baptist Convention is not a top-down organization. The executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention does not have authority over state conventions or member churches. It just doesn't. It's not a governing judicial body. It is a stewardship body that cares to and oversees the ongoings of the business of this fellowship, voluntary fellowship of churches, who say, hey, we're going to pay in this resources and money in order to accomplish these goals. And that is all the executive committee has the authority to do. And so it would literally, they cannot do often what we are wanting them to do. So many other things in the world are structured top-down, and what we would consider executives in those organizations do have authority over their constituent members. It's not that way in the Southern Baptist Convention. So whenever you go to the executive committee and you say, you need to do something about this, they can't. I mean, they literally just can't. It would be like if your neighbor was playing their music too loud and you come to me and say, their music's too loud. Okay, I agree. I mean, I guess I could go knock on the door and say, hey, turn it down, but I really have no authority over them. And so, and I know that strains at what we would like to see done, but we have to understand that in certain structures of society, it's limited in authority, right? God has instituted different areas in society with different realms of authority. The government is the one who bears the sword for the punishment of evildoers. Okay, the Southern Baptist Convention is not a civil magistrate. It's not a judicial entity. It's not what it does. And so coming to them seeking some kind of resolution to an issue they have no control over is frustrating, and I know that's where we want to go with things, because we look and we go, okay, well, you're the leading body, you must be in charge. Not in the Southern Baptist Convention. That's not how that works. And I know that presents all manner of obstacles and challenges to actually address the issue, and those are things which will be getting discussed later this month, here in a couple of weeks in Anaheim at the annual meeting. But I think we need to not be so quick to view this as dismissing. I mean, they literally don't have the authority. How many times over and over in the last, several years have conversations about politics gone where it was like, well, the president needs to do this, or the president wants to do that. And it's like, he literally can't. I mean, that's not his job. Or whenever, a judge, you sue for something, you want a judge to do a particular thing, it's like, well, that's not a judge's job, right? There's separate spheres of authority in society, and you have to go to the proper ones. And so, yes, our heart breaks for what victims have gone through, and we want to find workable solutions that function within the limitation and constrictions of just the reality of how things are in the world we live. And I think that's something that we need to also do in many things. We're so quick to just want to latch on to a particular authority figure or have something else answer and control something. And that's not, we need to make sure it's the proper entity that we are going to for the resolution of whatever the issue is. And so some of the things that have been requested, been wanted of the Southern Baptist Convention, that's just simply not within the ability of the Southern Baptist Convention to provide. So we have to look for the solution some other way. Again, very complicated issue. It's like a 500-page report, and I'm still going through it. But I wanted to bring that up because I think it's something that we do not just in this issue, but in other areas of life where we want resolution from somewhere where that's not actually where resolution comes from. So we need to pay attention to that. Okay, the other thing, slightly related, there's a story that I've been seeing, and it's not the first of its kind. A woman is assaulted on a subway, and other passengers just stand by and do nothing. We know this because one person at least was filming. So what happens in this particular video, you can see there's a guy who's walking around the subway car. He's erratic. He kicks a window, and he plops down next to these two women. One of them gets up and walks away, and the one with her gets up and starts to walk away too. He reaches up, grabs her ponytail, and yanks her down, and she's just standing there like, please help me. And thankfully, a moment later, he lets her go, and she gets away, and he continues on. But it's the idea that no one does anything. And this is not the first of these kind of stories or videos that I've seen, that it's actually a fairly common occurrence where people are doing things to other people, sometimes horrible things, on the subway, and nobody does anything. These stories are actually out there. It's like, what is going on that you see a wrong being committed, someone mistreated, and you do nothing? There's this weird schizophrenic, thing we got going on in our society where on one hand, we see something horrible go on and we go, we must do something. And then on the other hand, you see where people are actually in a position to stop something and they do nothing. And I think this might speak to a larger issue in our society of personal responsibility versus expecting that something else and someone else needs to solve the problem. Rather than us taking responsibility for ourselves, for our neighbors, for our community, rather we want the government or the police or whoever, whatever, to solve the problem for us. But we're commanded to care for and love others, right? Whenever it comes to the love one another, bear one another's burdens, be there for one another, love one another, those are commands to individuals that we are to help solve one another's problems. Not that we expect some faceless bureaucratic entity to swoop in and do it. Oh, no, I won't do that. That's their job. No, it's our job to take care of one another. And whether that is standing up for someone who is being assaulted, whether that is caring for the person on the street corner, whether that is helping the person in the pew next to you, whatever it is incumbent on us as individuals to care for one another as individuals. And so I think that's an area where we often get that wrong, and it's so much easier to expect someone else, some other system, to step in and do that for us. Now, kind of on that same note, someone helping out. Our feel-good story for this week is, I believe it's from Massachusetts, where a pizza delivery person ends up saving someone's life. There was a lady ordered a pizza. She was outside waiting, and she had a knee injury, and her knee just gives out. She's standing there, gives out. She falls to the ground, and in falling, hits her head. And the pizza delivery person shows up and just finds her laying out front in front of her house on the ground, bleeding from the head. And thankfully, the pizza delivery person had some emergency medical training. So, she runs up and is yelling, help, help, help. And someone who was in the house asleep wakes up, able to call 911. And while the paramedics are on the way, the pizza delivery person is able to care for her, stabilize, make sure she's okay while the paramedics are on their way. And so, again, taking care of, because how many people would just be like, hey, 911, there's a person here bleeding, come get them. However, this person was able to step in and help out, and that's how we need to be people who care for one another, who take responsibility for ourselves and for others around us. And so, all right. That's all I got for you this week of what's going on beyond the pews. If you have some issues you would love to talk about, you can put that in the comments. If you have some thoughts to offer on anything I've covered here, you can put that in the comments as well. I would love to hear from you. Thank you. God bless, and have a great day.
That little church on Liberty Hill, come praise the Lord, let your cup be filled. Raise your voices and we'll sing, let God's freedom ring from that little church on Liberty